Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, New Horizons in Arts Education, the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Program. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. Grantmakers in the Arts is a national association of public and private arts and culture funders. Our mission is to provide leadership and service that advances the use of philanthropic and governmental resources to support the growth of arts and culture. In May, we hosted a webinar on the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, and the value it brings to states. Today we have Aileen Ma, Senior Associate with Penn Hill Group, and Alex Nock, Penn Hill Group Principal, Penn Hill Group, who will share the exciting news about the $700 million increase in ESSA Student Support for Academic Enrichment funding. They will help us to understand the program and what it means for funders. Aileen Ma is a Senior Associate at Penn Hill Group, where she provides project management as well as research, consulting, and lobbying support. She also participates in driving Penn Hill's advocacy training and strategic convening work strands. She works on a variety of issues spanning from early learning and K-12 to higher education and workforce development, including arts education, special education, competency-based education, college access, and persistence as well as accreditation. Alex Nock is the principal at Penn Hill Group, where he brings 25 years of experience in federal education, disability, labor, and health policy to Penn Hill Group. At Penn Hill Group, Nock manages an array of clients across the full spectrum of policy areas. He helps clients identify and secure their policy goals with Congress, the administration, and congressional and presidential campaigns. He also helps clients better communicate their policy goals and objectives to policymakers and the public. We're glad to have them to present on this webinar. I will be joining after the presentation to facilitate a Q&A. Before we start, a quick housekeeping note. Throughout the presentation, you can type questions to the presenters or myself into the rectangular box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get all of them answered during the Q&A session. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Welcome, Aileen and Alex. Aileen, why don't you kick us off?
Hi, thanks so much, Sherilyn, for the introduction. And thanks so much, Grantmakers, for having us today. So again, my name is Aileen, and first, before we start, just wanted to give a brief overview of our webinar agenda today. So first, we'd like to provide folks with a refresher on the well-rounded education definition within ESSA to really frame what we're talking about today. And then we'd like to provide an overview of the Student Support and Academic Enrichment, or SSAE grants. What are they and how do they work? Following that, we'd like to discuss the fiscal year 2018 funding boost that the SSAE grant program received and what this additional funding means for states and districts. Then we'd also like to share with folks some reports from the field, specifically what we're hearing about districts and how they're planning to use SSAE funding. Following that, we'd also like to share with you effective strategies and approaches to engaging districts to help them leverage SSAE funding for arts education. And finally, after that, we hope to answer any questions and have a discussion with you all around this topic. So just like to jump in then. So the definition of well-rounded education. So just to remind folks, as defined in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was reauthorized by ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, a well-rounded education includes the arts. And so while some state plans only mention, for example, arts in the music or the fine arts or performing arts, under ESSA, this definition is broad. So it encompasses visual arts, music, dance, drama and theater, and media arts, even if a specific state plan may only mention, for example, arts and music. All of these arts disciplines are included within well-rounded education within ESSA. So given that, want to then jump into an overview of the Student Support and Academic Enrichment grants. So SSAE, or Title IV Part A program, we'll use these terms interchangeably throughout the webinar. They were authorized under Title IV Part A of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So essentially what the Title IV Part A program has done is establish flexible formula grants to states and districts to support 3 areas of activities. One is well-rounded educational opportunities, which include the arts, as we mentioned, defined by ESSA. And second, the second area is safe and healthy students, and specifically in FY18, this was clarified as also including school safety uses. And finally, effective use of technology is another area that these grants can support. So Title IV Part A grant funds flow to states, and then they're distributed to districts based on district's share of Title I formula. That is based on student need. So we'll get into how schools and districts are required to allocate the funding they receive within those 3 areas in a little bit. But before we get into that, just really want to highlight here that the recent funding levels of the SSAE program have just really, really increased. And so you'll see here that in FY 2017, the program received $400 million in funding. But in FY 2018, it had a 175% increase to $1.1 billion, which is just very significant if you think about it in terms of how there are so many programs right now that have had their line items significantly decreased, and other programs have also even faced the chopping block. So put in that context, this is very, very significant. And in FY 2019, in the House bill, currently the program has $1.2 billion. So we really just see this funding being sustained going forward. And this represents funding which districts now have to come up with a plan for. They did not previously anticipate receiving this funding, so they also have not had a designated purpose for this funding in the past. So given this, we are particularly excited by how this funding can be leveraged for arts education. So now we just like to go over a few examples of allowable uses for funds, specifically within the well-rounded educational opportunities bucket. So these, by the way, are not meant to be exhaustive by any means, but are just meant to highlight some examples of allowable uses. So, for example, improving access to the arts would be one possible allowable use. Also, providing STEM educational programming, STEAM educational programming, and increasing student engagement in these subjects would also be an opportunity, as well as strengthening instruction in history, civics, geography, and environmental education. And finally, another example would be promoting access to advanced placement, dual or concurrent enrollment, or other rigorous coursework. So these are just a few examples of allowable uses for funds within well-rounded, within the SSAE program. So finally, we also do want to emphasize that the Title IV Part A grant program does really recognize the impact of strong community-based partnerships. So within the grant program, districts may utilize funds within the well-rounded education and also the safe and healthy students buckets to develop and implement programs and activities by working with a variety of stakeholders and organizations. For example, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, or other public or private entities with demonstrated records of success in implementing these activities. So we really wanted to highlight that because we know that many of you are funders or funder groups and may work intimately with organizations who definitely fulfill one of these criteria and could certainly engage with districts in this process. So now we'd also like to talk a little bit about how funding will be made available to districts and what requirements are attached to these funding allocations within the grant program. So funds will be made available to states and then districts through an application process. And then following that, there are some requirements on how funds are allocated by districts. So for schools and districts receiving an allocation of more than $30,000, they will need to do a needs assessment every 3 years to determine priorities in terms of how they will use the funds to best meet their student needs. So specifically, that first round of assessments will need to be completed before grant funds are distributed. But so how then are these schools and districts required to allocate funding into the 3 different activity areas? So in terms of well-rounded education, in terms of that priority, no less than 20% of funding must be allocated towards well-rounded education, which, as you can see, could include a variety of disciplines. And then in terms of safe and healthy, that also is 20%, so no less than 20% must be allocated in this priority area if a school or district receives more than $30,000. And then finally, no more than 60% must be spent on any of the 3 priorities, including well-rounded education and including technology. But within that, within technology specifically, no more than 15% may be used to fund technological infrastructure, for example, digital content or devices such as computers, iPads, that sort of thing. So finally, what about schools and districts that receive less than $30,000? So here, their schools and districts would be required to spend money on activities in at least one of the 3 categories. For example, well-rounded education. And in fact, they could even place all the money that they receive in just one content category. Again, for example, well-rounded education. If, however, schools choose to spend money on technology, effective use of technology, they cannot use more than 15% to fund technological infrastructure, for example, equipment or digital content. So there is still that cap there. Moving on. Oh, so now we also just like to highlight, we did talk about the funding boost that the program received in FY 2018, but also want to talk a little bit about how that has affected how funds are distributed and how that will affect different priorities. So now that the Congress has funded the program at a significantly higher rate, you'll see here, as we mentioned, states are now required to distribute this funding via formula to school districts, whereas when Congress first funded the program at $400 million in FY 2017, which is the first year of the program since ESSA was reauthorized and the program existed, that first year of the program, states were given the option to distribute funding via formula or competition, given the fact that there was, far less funding in the program compared to now. So I guess jumping back to now, given the higher funding level, as mentioned, states are now required to distribute funding via formula to school districts. And also, we'd just like to highlight, too, that in addition, appropriators included in their omnibus bill a lot of report language signaling and encouraging districts to support school safety measures in response to the school tragedies we've been having around the country. So again, these funds for the Title IV Part A program will be made available, have been made available by July 1st, starting July 1st, that is. And lastly, we do want to just highlight, where what the appropriations outlook for the program is in FY 2019. So while the FY 2019 appropriations process is still ongoing, we do expect final appropriations for the SSAE program to look very much in line with what we're seeing right now in the House and Senate Appropriations Committee bills. So in the House bill, the program was increased by about $100 million to $1.2 billion total. And in the Senate bill, the program has seen an increase by about $125 million to about $1.225 billion total. So again, just really want to emphasize that we see this as Congress signaling that they want to fund this program, and so we think that school districts can continue to expect high, grant funds from this program. So I want to highlight that as folks work with districts on this. And next, just wanted to provide you a visual of how different these grant amounts look at the statewide level. So if you see here, the first bar is how much funding states received in FY 2017 based on the $400 million in appropriations. And then if you look at the second bar, the purple bar, that shows how much funding states will expect to receive based on the FY 2018 appropriations of $1.1 billion. So we definitely see significant increases based on states, especially around states with higher populations in general, and also higher populations of poverty. But as you can see, every state across the country will receive some sort of significant increase. And again, we think this is very promising as states move forward on how they plan to utilize these funds. And we also see this as meaning that districts will think differently about how they use these funds as well. So now we just really want to highlight a few different districts and show this funding boost. So this is a brief overview of what these grant amounts could look like at the district level. So, while we're unable to provide grant amounts for all districts during our webinar today, we just really want to highlight some larger school districts to give you an idea of what their funding could look like under FY 2018. So, for example, you'll see here the Bronx County Public Schools School District is estimated to receive $16 million. And if you look further down the list, for example, Metropolitan Nashville Public School District receives about $2 million. So there's definitely a range in the amount of funds, but these are still significant amounts of money. So under the requirements of Title IV Part A, again, these are examples of districts who receive more than $30,000, and so they would need to do school needs assessments and plan accordingly to utilize the funding under the three buckets. And again, this is just a few other examples of school districts. And again, if you have any specific questions related to a specific school district, we'd be happy to look into that, and just please let grant makers know. And while we may not have the information at our fingertips at the moment, we would be happy to look into that. Next, so again, really trying to emphasize why all this matters. The FY 2018 funding increase is the first time school districts will receive significant funding under this program. So we really see this as an opportunity to get an idea on how districts and states plan to utilize this money and what they intend to support using this funding. So, as mentioned, districts will need to be planning now how they will utilize this funding. And if, in the case that they receive more than $30,000, they will need to conduct a needs assessment and engage in meaningful discussion with a broad range of stakeholders. And a few examples of who these stakeholders might be, by no means an exhaustive list, are local government representatives, community-based organizations, and others with relevant demonstrated expertise. So, definitely GIA funder groups and organizations funded by GIA members should look at this as an opportunity to really engage with districts as they start planning how they will use these resources. So, really, we just want to highlight this as a prime time for folks to get involved. If a school district is still going through the needs assessment process, or even if it's already sort of sketched out an initial plan, we really encourage folks to think about getting involved and plugging into those conversations, especially as schools in many cases should have received funding very recently. So next, we would like to share some reports from the field, or what we're hearing in terms of what districts are planning to do with their Title IV Part A funds. So recently, the School Superintendents Association, the National Association of Federal Program Administrators, and Whiteboard Advisors did a survey of school districts across the country to find out how districts are planning on using SSAE grant funds. And so as of June 18th, there were more than 622 respondents, in fact, describing their plans to utilize funding under the grant program. So just wanted to share with you in general how districts plan to use these funds. And you'll see here on this chart that 63%, the majority of districts reported that they plan to spend at least a portion of their Title IV Part A funds on making students safer. And that's then followed by school counseling as the second most popular choice at 43%. You'll see here that 37% of districts reported other, and that 27% of districts reported supports for AP courses, IB courses, and other rigorous coursework, including, for example, paying for AP fees as a priority use of funds. And then that's followed by physical education at 17%. In addition, in the survey, districts also answered how they plan to use funds to support well-rounded education specifically. So here you can see that 61% of districts responded that they planned on allocating funds for STEM. Although I will note that I think part of the reason why maybe some districts who might be interested in doing STEAM also responded, in the STEM bucket is likely due to how the survey was set up. And so this is by no means an exhaustive list of how districts are planning on utilizing their funds. But so again, the largest percent of districts plan on using funds for STEM and possibly STEAM, although it's not reflected in this language. And that's followed by 53% of districts planning on using funds for social and emotional learning. Then college and career counseling at 37%, and music/arts at 32%, which again, I think in this instance definitely does not mean that districts aren't planning on using funds for other arts disciplines. I think this is more likely more related to how the survey was set up. Then you'll see following that, other uses of funds are again AP, IB courses at 28%, dual or concurrent enrollment at 22%, and then followed by smaller percentages of districts planning on using funds to support foreign language instruction, civics, and environmental education, with a handful of districts responding other or none. So now that you've heard a bit about what specific programming districts have at least initially planned to use their Title IV Part A funds for, next up, I'll be turning to my colleague Alex, who will speak about effective strategies that you can use to step forward to the table and approach districts as partners, or enable your grantees to approach districts as partners in helping them achieve these goals and implement arts education or educational activities informed by arts approaches. Here you go, Alex.
Thanks, Aileen. So the next segment of this webinar is going to cover a couple of different topics, as Aileen said. One, all really around effective strategies to engage districts to kind of advance the use of this program's funds to support the arts. So first, we're going to talk about how you can understand your state's ESSA plan and the opportunities for arts engagement. Second, understanding the SSAE program in general. And then third, mapping your funders group strengths against the goals of the SSE program and your local school district's priorities. Fourth, meeting with your local school districts. And fifth, and not last, and certainly not least important, debrief, and don't forget to follow up as you engage folks on this. So if we could turn to the next slide. So first, understanding your state's ESSA plan. So a great resource for that, among many, is referring to GIA's website for your state's ESSA plan summary. On GIA's website, you'll find a guide to the Every Student Succeeds Act and its main titles, so you can get a sense of what the law is about and what the law requires, as well as how the titles relate to arts education work. We have a summary of your state's plan, as well as how the plan plans to incorporate the arts and arts education. Specifically, this would be how your state signaled out how it intends to incorporate the arts under their approach. If your state didn't specifically name the arts in its plan, the summary highlights areas of flexibility where ESSA allows the arts to be supported through different federal funding streams based on districts' decisions. So there's still a chance to engage and say, did you know this program, this law allows you to do this? Are you going to take advantage of it? And then just as a side note, the summary also includes recommendations on how to engage with both your state Department of Education as well as leaders in your districts and local schools, which we're going to cover a little bit more about later. But that's a great resource if you haven't taken advantage of it. Now, we're moving on to understanding the the actual program. So if you are going to engage on this, it's really important to study up to ensure that you know kind of how the program works and whether your funder group supports activities that can be supported with SSAE funds. So, you know, in what ways in particular can your funder group help help schools reach their goals under the program? Looking at how districts and states have outlined what they want to do with program funding, where do your goals as a funder group fit into this? Then, secondarily, determining the level of funding your district will receive in 2019. You want to find out how much funding the district received in 2017. How did they use it last year? This can help give you an idea of what they might want to do in FY 2018. Will your district receive a significant amount of funding in 2018? Almost certainly, as Aileen went over and covered when she looked at when she described how the funding would be distributed. Will they be required to do a needs assessment? Has this already happened, i.e. have they looked at kind of what their needs were across the entire district? These are all very important steps, and again, as Aileen highlighted, you know, this is a really opportune time to engage because districts are more than likely going to receive pretty big infusions of resources under this program. Some, you know, probably almost 3 times what they received in 2017. So it's a great opportunity to think about what can be done in a stronger way or in a more robust way if they're doing something around the arts, or what new projects or initiatives can be generated through these resources. And then also understanding, you know, what are the district's priorities? Do some research on the district's broader priorities. You know, often districts will use federal funds to support, you know, broader district-wide priorities they intended to support anyway. You know, this kind of research will help provide you some insight on how they will be looking to use their Title IV Part A funds. We list several examples here, everything from supporting arts approaches through STEAM, fostering strong community partnerships, developing and administering well-rounded education, a well-rounded education needs assessment. But make sure to familiarize yourself with district-wide priorities and its strategic plan for reaching these goals. And then also you need to map your own strengths. You know, map your funders group strengths against these goals, against the goals of the SSAE program and the priorities of the district. Based on your research of the district's goals and the SSAE program, where are the areas of overlap? You know, if there are areas of overlap, how can these areas help guide your engagement with the district? Based on what you find, consider developing a menu of supports or services that your funder group can provide the district to help achieve their goals. Very often we find that folks are trying to engage districts. It's less beneficial to go and say, hey, we can do all this great stuff, and essentially trying to fit, you know, your, you know, a round peg into their square hole, but more often saying, hey, we work in a number of areas, where do you need help? and what can we do to support what you're doing? And very often there are ways you can engage and help them think through how to do things either on a bigger or better scale. And then certainly meeting with your local school district. Reach out to schedule a meeting. Is there a particular department or staff person to contact who manages the funding? Perhaps it's also a person who manages external partnerships. Reach out to schedule that meeting with that person, to engage and start developing a relationship. Again, like I was talking about here, we think it's very powerful to present essentially a menu of services, come prepared with this idea of all the things you can do to help and how your funder group can help the district reach its goals. Again, what are their ideas, what do they need to do to move forward, and how you can help. And obviously make sure you bring background information on your organization's work, the effectiveness of your programs, improving quality, ensuring accountability. If you haven't worked in the past with this district, you're essentially developing a brand new relationship. And I think that's something that might need some time to mature, and also certainly should be accompanied in a first meeting with some background information to ensure that everyone knows where everyone's focused and what they might work on. And then lastly, certainly as you engage in these meetings, you definitely want to debrief and talk about next steps. Based on the meeting or conversation you had with district level officials, to determine, then the next step is to determine the appropriate, next steps and send along any relevant background information. Make sure you follow up if they ask for something. Make sure that, if there's something you said you would provide, that you provide it. And think about, all right, what are the next steps? They seem really interested in these two elements of what we talked about. Is there further information we can present? Can we share with them work we've done with other organizations that might essentially drive them to think that partnering with us might make sense? Then secondarily, assemble your champions. If appropriate, consider any relevant champions, local leaders, funders, other partners who might be able to keep the conversations going and might be able to help in securing that partnership with the district, especially folks that you've worked with in the past, folks that you work with that have worked with them in the past. I can all provide great examples of the quality and scope of work that you might be able to help them with. And then lastly, following up, making sure to follow up is a key aspect of any sort of relationship development. Maybe the district isn't quite ready to partner at a certain time, but they might be as they realize that they have, significant needs, and that, you can imagine a district that hadn't yet done its needs assessment. They might come back after the fact and say, boy, we actually did realize we need a lot of help in this area. Could you help us? So making sure to touch base and give them a sense that you're going to, be there for the long haul and stay in contact with them is very important. I talked about this briefly, but the approach to these conversations is very important. What is the response if you come into your state or district and say, what do you need? Do you need help? And here we have this great yes or no. You really want to fashion this as a conversation between, like, here's what we do. What are your goals, and how can we best kind of help you? Through this conversation. If you're, if you're, looking at this in a way, and I think that the next slide, kind of covers this the best. If you just come in there and say, here's all the stuff we can do, will you adopt our XYZ program? That may or may not fit with what they're doing, and they may not see kind of how it's doing. Districts may or may not know exactly what they need if you're kind of just selling a whole-scale program to them versus, like, here are all the areas we work, here are some programs we work on, they could be adapted, they can be used, in a way that complements, these sort of priorities you had. And the next slide really, outlines the approach we think makes the most sense in a lot of conversations with districts. We understand that you're working on these priorities. We offer these services, ideas, concepts, technical assistance, hence the menu concept that we think can help meet your goals in terms of defining what you might want to do. And then, again, if that's the, approach you're using, a possible answer from the district might be better than here's this program, please adopt it. They're more likely to think about how that particular service or that item on the menu fits with what they're trying to do. That might sound interesting. Tell us about how the service could help us. Always end with, even with the menu options you present, what else might you need? That might you need from us? They may say, hey, I see you do this. Have you ever thought about doing it in this way? And you may actually be doing it in that way. You may have some experience. You may think that's a good idea. So there are ways that partnerships could form around new services and new ideas as well. So I think then our next slide here for Aileen and us is whether or not we have any questions. Sherilyn, where are we in the question queue here?
Great, yes. So we do have some questions. We've got quite a few. But I first want to say thank you to both of you. That was an awesome presentation, and it was great to learn more about the block grant program and the impact it has on districts and funders specifically. So with our Q&A, a lot of you have already figured out. You asked your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And just remember to address your questions to a specific presenter if that's necessary. So in terms of our first question, I believe that this person is referring to slides 12 or 13, if you want to scroll back there. And they ask, does the SSAE funding for a well-rounded education portion come under that 37% categorized as other? Because they noticed that the well-rounded education wasn't necessarily mentioned in earlier slides. So that's the first part of the question, and then if we can answer that one, and then I can go back to the remainder of the question.
Aileen, I believe the answer to that is yes, right? I think we're trying to kind of highlight that,
Yep.
There are different pockets of activities that folks are looking to fund under here, and the other category is one that would include that. But if you look at the next slide, I think that really tells the better picture, I think, right, Aileen? It's page 15, I think.
No, sorry.
Where that specifically says, how are, when you look at well-rounded educational activities, what are districts looking to support?
Right.
And nearly a third of well-rounded educational activity money is looking at being used for the music or arts. And as Aileen said, there may be crossover with that around STEAM,
Right.
social emotional learning. Aileen, maybe you want to address that more fully.
Sure. So certainly, I'm sorry. So if I understand the question correctly, I think these are just some initial answers that we've heard in that survey mentioned from districts who have just, I think when they answered the survey, they had just begun the process of planning out how they would utilize funding. So these are just a couple of examples, but certainly that is included. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Yeah, feel free to send a follow-up question if anything needs clarification, but that does cover it as far as I understand. Okay, another question we've got, California-specific question. So in California, districts already have to go through an inclusive local control accountability planning process. Can that process, quote-unquote, count as Title IV? Or do they have to go through a whole new needs assessment process to access or spend those funds?
So my thought would be we're not intimately familiar with every exact aspect of how the local accountability process that the questioner talks about. The needs assessment in Title IV is really related to what needs should be identified for use with this funding. So I would think that you could probably incorporate that needs assessment into the effort that you would do to move forward with that local accountability plan, but you'd need to incorporate the elements that the federal government kind of envisions that should be in the needs assessment for the Title IV Part A program. So by itself, not knowing the details of every aspect of that requirement, that in terms of the local California picture, I'm not sure, but if it didn't cover one element of it, you would essentially either need to incorporate that needs assessment as a part of that if you're doing it already, or conversely do something separate if that's the the choice that people want to proceed with.
Yep.
Great. Is there any estimate of how many districts have chosen to move all of their money to Title, oh, I see Title I. Okay.
That's a great question. Let me pull that up here. Sorry, just one moment as I look this up. But there is an estimate. Sorry, actually, Sherilyn, do you mind if we move to another question while I pull this up?
Yeah, that's no problem at all.
We can return to this.
Great. For sure, yeah, absolutely. So really quickly, this is just a timing question. Alex, maybe you can ask this question, answer this question. If the money is coming out now or soon, and districts are planning priorities like you talked about in the survey, how should they approach the timing of this?
How should the folks we're talking to here on the call approach the time of this?
Yep, attendees.
Yeah, this is definitely the time to engage districts. You know, they're going to be thinking about getting these dollars. They're thinking about planning what they're going to do for the rest of the school year. Frankly, a lot of this stuff may be ongoing sets of planning. So in terms of timing, I think that's why Aileen hit upon this in one of her slides, is that now is really the time to engage. You know, how do districts plan on using their resources? Have they thought about how the arts how the arts play a role will play a role in kind of what they intend to do? Do they know about the opportunities here? What did their needs assessment say? What if they haven't done a needs assessment? Those sort of things. So definitely now is the time to engage. That's one of the reasons we're having this webinar at this time. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Aileen, are you ready, or should I?
I am.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, in response to the question, you know, is there an estimate of how many districts have chosen to move all of their money to Title I? Actually, the answer is that the majority, about 76%, of district surveys do not plan on transferring that money to other parts of ESSA. So this is actually an allowable use under the law to transfer Title IV Part A funds to other programs within ESSA. But as mentioned, you know, the majority aren't planning on transferring the funds. About 16% of school districts responded in the survey that they plan to transfer their funds to Title I, and about 7% said they plan to transfer to Title II. And it doesn't look like any respondents said they would transfer to Title III. So yeah, so just the majority are not planning on transferring funding and do plan on utilizing SSAE funding.
And from a practical standpoint, Sherilyn, it would, you know, make little sense if the district wanted more flexibility, you know, in how they spend their funds to transfer it out of what is arguably the most flexible program in ESSA. Putting aside whether or not a district's going to address anything around the arts, if you want to address something around school safety, or you want to address something around technology, certainly you can do some of that stuff in Title I, but if you want much more of a freer hand in terms of doing that, then keeping this money in this pot, you know, makes a lot of sense. And obviously one of the reasons that, you know, we would hope that people would engage districts is because this does provide, you know, an opportunity to be very, very flexible with the resources and really address an area of the arts that probably is even more, you know, you have more of ability to address things around the arts in this program than you would a Title I program. So, you know, this is one of the reasons that we suggest engagement just in general, because people want to, you know, we want districts to make sure they knew of the opportunities in this program and keeping money in these funds. And you can see from Eileen's, you know, explanation of what we've heard in terms of this survey, you know, the vast majority of districts are intending to keep the money in Title IV, but for the ones that aren't, maybe that's an opportunity to educate the, you know, your district about what the value of this program is.
Yeah, and then on the same kind of vein of flexibility, I'm going back to the timeline question. How much of that is set in stone, or do you think districts are movable if there's a range of issues, a few different things that they're working on? How much of that is flexible, the timeline? In
terms of when to engage and how to engage, like we're suggesting?
Yeah.
I think there's always a good time to start a relationship with the school district when you get these sort of resources. I think here's the other thing that Aileen touched upon in her portion of the presentation, which is I think is important to keep in mind. Let's say because of different competing priorities, it's just a real challenge for someone on the call to engage their districts right now, right? It's just a challenge, and maybe they can't get to it till the spring. I'm just making up a possible scenario here. Well, obviously, you know, what you're going to do with the money for this school year would be hard to impact if you came and talked to somebody at the end of the school year, right? But this is the one program that continues to get bipartisan support, not that other programs don't, but continues to also get bipartisan increases in the K-12 arena. Obviously, we highlighted this $700 million increase that's happening between 2017 and 2018, but the program is slated to get another $100 or $200 million increase on top of, you know, the $700 million increase nationally. If this trend continues, every year school districts are going to be getting new and additional resources in this program. So if you can't engage this year, obviously it's a great time to do it. We'd be remiss if we didn't stress that again. Realize that the likelihood of new fiscal opportunities, at least for the next couple years, is pretty high with this program. So if the district has either chosen to not do something around the arts with their Title IV money, it's a chance when they get new money to do something. And two, if they have begun something, there's a chance to be more robust with it, you know, each year when new money shows up. So again, if this year doesn't work out, okay, we forgive you. but I think it looks like the next couple of years there's a great opportunity for this. So I hope that is responsive to the question. So
yes, for sure. I've got another region-specific question. Okay. So someone who wants to know about Long Beach Unified School Districts and how much that school district is going to received in 2018. I know that you did write an article about the new increase in funding, and within that article there's also a link to SSAE and more information there. But is there anything else that you can share about how folks can find out more about how much funding their community or their district is receiving? That'd be great.
So I don't believe the department, Aileen, correct me if I'm wrong, does district level estimates for this program. They do state level estimates. But so one thing you could do is obviously contact your district, and they may actually post that information online. Long Beach is a bigger than average district. They're actually a member of some of the larger school district constituencies in terms of interest groups around the country. So they're more apt to have much more mature and kind of publicly available sort of information around these programs. The most important thing is they're probably going to get about triple the money they got in 2017. Yep. So they probably got a decent size, one, being in California, because California gets a fair amount of resources because of its size in general. In terms of the number of kids it's had. Two, it's a bigger district, even for California standards, competing with Oakland and San Francisco and places like that. But three, no matter what, it's going to get a pretty big infusion of cash. But I think the surefire way is go look at their website and see if they publicly reported something, or if not, give them a call and say, you know, what did you get, and you would know.
Yep.
Great. Aileen, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, just definitely agree. So on the department's website, state-level information on allocations is available. So what we did in our estimates in this presentation was just, you know, base it off of FY 2017 estimates and then the increase. So we're doing a little bit of guesstimation here, but we think, you know, that could be a way to initially sort of get an idea of a ballpark number.
Great. And one final question before we wrap up. Can you speak a little bit more about the GIA State ESSA Plan Summary tool that you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. So believe this tool will be on Grantmaker's website soon, but please correct us. I'm sure if we're not right.
That's accurate. That's accurate.
Fantastic. So really, as Alex mentioned, this tool will include you know, an overview on ESSA in general, on its titles, to give an idea of what is in ESSA and how that relates to arts education. But also it'll include a brief summary for each state, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, in terms of how the state plan talks about how how we'll provide for well-rounded education, for example, through the Title IV Part A program, or through programs such as the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program. So we include a lot of information in terms of what states say, as well as, for example, if a state plans on including the arts or access to the arts in its as sort of an additional indicator. We also include just a brief summary on whatever states outline in their plans to give folks an idea of how to engage at the state level and also at the district level. And as Alex mentioned, in the case of, for example, some states which may not explicitly mention well-rounded education or the arts, we talk about, we include information on the flexibility within the ESSA plan to provide other ideas for engagement there to advance arts education. So I hope that's a helpful sort of, I guess, summary of the summary.
Absolutely. That was a great summary of the summary. Thank you for that. So we're coming to the end of our session. We don't have any more questions. But before I go, I want to thank Aileen Ma and Alex Nock once again for presenting today. We enjoyed having you, and you left us with much deeper understanding of the concrete tools that we can use and funders can use to learn more about what their state offers, and just where we can find other resources and learning more about the program. So today's presentation has been recorded. We'll be sending you a link to that file and the presentation slides within the next day or two, along with a brief survey we hope you'll take a few minutes to fill out. The feedback is important to us, and it helps us to design future webinars. If you'd like the opportunity to flip through the slides now, we've switched over the slides controls to you, and the slides will be up for the next hour or two. And you can always reach out to me, Sherilyn Seeley, if you have any further questions. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.